Random, KP.
Hello and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, well, join the club, because so am I. This is my first ever video I am shooting for BookTube, and I'm kind of excited about it. I've kind of wanted to join BookTube for a bit now because I feel like I've read a lot this year and I love reading, and none of my friends are really big readers, and the ones that do read, we don't kind of read the same stuff. So I want to join BookTube so I could post my opinions or my feelings about books and have people to talk to about it. So here I am. I'm going to be rating every single book I read this year. I'm gonna do it in order of the first to last book I read this year. I think I'm gonna try and do it that way, if I can remember, because I've got a really bad memory when it comes to like dates and stuff. I'm gonna try and go in order. So let's see. Okay, so the first book of this year, the book that got me back into reading, because 2021, 2022, I did not read like at all. For context, I was living in South Korea teaching English. I actually just moved back 2 months ago to the States, so. But I just was stressed all the time and I just didn't have time. Like, if anyone knows about teaching in like in Korea or any Asian country, it's a big commitment time-wise. You've got a lot of hours, a lot of work to do, and I couldn't make myself read. And I got this book and it unlocked reading again for me, and I love it so much. It is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie. I love this book. I love this book with all of my heart. It's based off of Korean mythology, which is why I read it. Someone had recommended it to me because of that. And it's just like reading, it's like a Studio Ghibli movie in book form with like Korean mythology, and it's just beautiful, and the romance in it is just so sweet. And it's like an enemies to lovers thing, which I'm usually not the biggest fan of, but I'm starting to think I might be a fan of that trope. I'm not gonna lie, it's been hitting in the books that I've been reading this year. So maybe I'm an enemies to lovers girly. I don't know. But yeah, so this book, 10 out of 10. Like, there's nothing, actually, my one problem with this book is that it ended. I would love more with these characters and with the main couple. I love Mina, the main character, so much. She's so passionate and strong and gentle and kind, and just she's just the epitome of everything I would want to be. Just doing what she thinks she needs to do for others, but also doing what she needs to do for herself too. Like, I just love her. I love her. I love the love interest. What is, oh my god, what's his name? Ah, Shin, that's right. I read this book in, I think, January or February, so it's been a while since I've come to it. Also, this is the only book, one of two only books that I have ever actually tabbed and like highlighted stuff inside of it. So I also tried to paint the edge and I kind of messed it up, so we're going to ignore that. Love this book. Love this book. This is probably one of my top 5. Not even probably, this is one of my top 5 books of the year. I love this book. Okay, so the next book, kind of keeping on Asian fantasy stories, Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sutherland. I also really loved this book. I read it so fast. It is just so amazing. And again, I loved the main character. I just loved her heart. I loved her determination in what she was doing, and how she wasn't afraid to kind of lie to get what she wanted, but she also was very kind to people. Like, I don't know. I feel like there's been a bad habit recently in strong female characters needing to equate to like these really cold, like badass kind of like I don't care about anything else type of characters, which isn't like, I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think there's been too much of that recently, especially in like movies and TV shows, of like that's the epitome of like what a woman should be, is like cold and badass and like manipulative, and like I think this is my favorite kind of female main character, where they can manipulate and they're badass and they get what they want, but they're also just genuinely like good people, and they're like doing things for the sake of what's right and what they need. I don't know. I'm like rambling on about this. I hope this makes sense. But I love this book. It's about Chinese. It comes from Chinese mythology, Chinese fantasy. I watch Chinese like fantasy dramas sometimes, so a lot of the language and like the cultural aspects in this book I already knew about, and it was pretty easy to understand. But I do think if you don't know anything about Chinese fantasy or Chinese culture, especially historical culture, it could be a confusing read at first, but I think the writing is so good and the characters are so good that it'll suck you in anyways, and that doesn't really matter. Also, I love the first like coupling, like the main character and her first love interest. That was the cutest romance I've ever seen in my life, and I loved it so much. Spoilers to anyone who hasn't read this and want to read this. Anyways. Okay, spoilers are done now. This book was amazing. I loved it. I loved all the characters. I loved the plot. 10 out of 10 book for me. Also, this was the other book that I had tabbed, but not this version. I had a paperback that I accidentally left in Korea that had my tabs and stuff in it, so I'm really sad about that, but yeah, 10 out of 10 book. Okay, so obviously, next book that I read, Heart of the Sun Warrior, the sequel. And I have to be honest, I didn't like this one that much. I really didn't. The first book was a 10 out of 10. I loved it so much. This, I'm a very fast reader. I think this took me a couple weeks to get through. Yeah, I loved the first book. I did not like this one that much. The main character, I felt like she had a really big personality change in this one. It just didn't feel like the decisions she was making, it didn't feel like she would have made them in the first book. And that's not to say that characters don't change over time, because they do and they should, but it felt like she was going backwards instead of like progressing in a character arc. Because there wasn't really even an arc, it was just, I don't know how to explain it. And I hope if anyone else has read this duality, I'd be really interested in your take on the second book and if you liked it just as much as the first one. But I felt like so much of this book revolved around this like love triangle situation, and I just really didn't like it. I felt like the plot was so serious and intense that 95% of her inner dialogue was like about the general or Leeway, and just back and forth and back and forth. And especially, this is where enemies to lovers doesn't work for me, because enemies to lovers, when it's at the start of a book and you don't like someone and then you get to know them, that's one thing. But when you had feelings and left someone and then you betrayed them to the point that you become enemies, it's over. I don't want to see them become lovers again. No, get them out of here. And you know who she ends up with at the end? The freaking man who betrayed her. The freaking man who betrayed her. So I didn't like that. I still think the writing is beautiful. I still think it was a very interesting plot, and I think plot-wise, minus the romance that there was a lot of, the plot was good. It was good. I took a while to get through it, but it really did keep me interested and I had to finish it. My other one gripe is the fact that the only person who died, well, like, died and didn't come back in this book, was the child. What's up with that? Why'd you kill the child? Why'd you kill him? He deserved better. 6 out of 10 for this book. Okay, so we're gonna take a little detour from fantasy books into horror, because from like April to July, I was on a horror kick, and all I read was these 4 horror books. First up, we have Penpal by Dathan Auerbach, I think is how you pronounce it. I am obsessed with this book. I love this book. It is one of the best books I've ever read, which is apparently an unpopular opinion from reading reviews online. I don't even care. It's so good. I love horror. I'm the kind of person who puts on like horror movies before bed to go to sleep. I don't get scared easily, especially from books. It's hard for a book to scare me, I feel like. I don't know why, but I feel like it's hard to master that like scary atmosphere in a book. And this book does it perfectly. It was so creepy and chilling, and it just had this sense of every time I went to turn the page, I was nervous because I was like, I don't know what's going to be on the next page, and I'm freaked out about it. It's basically about this narrator who is an adult who's trying to piece together his past when he was a kid, and all this weird stuff was happening to him that he couldn't understand. So being an adult and reading this book, because the book is from the perspective of a child, like it's his childhood memory, so he's a child telling you the story. So you're reading it as an adult, and he's explaining things in this childlike way, but you know that it's something bad. He's too young to understand, so he's explaining these things he can't understand in a way, but you're like, oh no. Oh no. No. And it's amazing. It's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's horrific. It made me so unsettled. The ending left a hole in my heart more than anything I've ever read, really. Like, I didn't know how to be a person again after I finished this book. I read it in like maybe an hour and a half because it's a pretty short book, and I was invested. 10 out of 10 book. It was so good. I loved it so much. Please read it. Please, everyone read this book. Okay, so next, I don't even remember how I came across this book, but it's this little tiny book called Dear Laura by Gemma Amor. Like, teeny tiny little book. I read it so fast, and it was horrific. It's just this girl had a friend named Bobby go missing when she was young, and every year on her birthday she gets a letter from a stranger who says that they know where Bobby is, and he'll give her clues or he'll tell her if she gives him what he wants. And the things that he asks for just gets progressively horrendous, and it was just intense. It was intense. The ending kind of made me sad a little bit, but justice was served, I guess, and yeah, I don't know how to feel about this book. It was really wild. It was wild. I guess just, I'm gonna give this a 6 out of 10, just because I think the writing wasn't that great, and I feel like I only really kept reading for the shock value of it, I guess. But I did enjoy the story overall, so maybe a 6.5 out of 10. I wouldn't read it again because I don't care about it that much. But it was interesting it was an interesting premise. Yeah, 6.5 out of 10. Next one, we have Brother by Ahlborn. Ania. I'm not really sure how to say her name, so I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but also I decided it deserved to have painted edges because I just wanted to. This book was messed up in the best way. I am a big fan of Criminal Minds, and this felt like I was reading an episode of Criminal Minds. Can I say that I really enjoyed this book, given the content that's in it? I feel like I shouldn't say I really enjoyed it. I blazed through this book also, though, because I just needed to know what happened next. It definitely keeps you kind of on the edge of like, so the main character is one of the sons of a serial killer family, and he's not really about that life like his family is. Like, he does the stuff, but he doesn't want to, and he doesn't like it, and he doesn't enjoy it the way that his family does. He's not very violent. He's basically only a part of it because he has to be. And you spend the whole book like, oh my god, I want him to get out. I'm rooting for this guy. Because, yeah, he's done all this messed up stuff, but... So you really root for him. And I really enjoyed this book all the way up until the end. And I know books don't have to have a good ending. They don't have to have a happy ending. And I can enjoy a book that doesn't. But this book in particular, I really wanted one. Not even a happy ending, but just not so much of a sad ending, because the whole book is just so dark and so sad and so horrific that I just really wanted my boy to get out. Spoiler alert, everyone in this book dies at the end. Everyone's dead. And I wanted, you know, just at least one person to go on. That's all I wanted. Did the ending fit though? Yes, so I can't be too mad about it. I just really wanted my boy to move on and have a happy life. But I think it did kind of drag on a little bit in some spots. There's the cat. But other than that, I thought it was really good. I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. The last book in my trip down horror lane, Gone to See the Riverman. What the hell is this book, guys? Has anyone else read this? Has anyone else read this? Because if not, you should, solely so that I know that there's other people out here who have had to endure this book. It's a really fast read. You would think in this little amount of pages, there would not be enough content to thoroughly F up your brain. You'd be wrong. You'd be so wrong, because this book is crazy. I should have known, because even the whole premise, like on the back, it tells you that the main character is one of those people who like becomes pen pals with serial killers in prison. So I don't know why I thought this book wasn't going to be horrific when that's what you're told the premise is. But I was like, yeah, that sounds fun. I want to read that. I want to read that. And you know what? It was horrendous. In the best way. Disgusting content that was in this. It was the plot and the storytelling and the characters were great. They weren't good people. They weren't good. But the characters themselves were all really interesting, great characters, and the author does such a good job of taking this main character and kind of like, yeah, she's weird. She's quirky, you know, because pen pal with a serial killer. But, you know, she doesn't feel like a bad person until you keep reading. And then you're like, oh my god, this is the worst person ever. And it's great because in a book about a serial killer and this actual, I don't even know what the Riverman is supposed to be, some sort of, I think he's like a demon. The main character is equally horrific, and she is just a normal person who has a normal job, takes care of her sister. Like, that's how she's portrayed at the beginning. She's a normal person, she works, she takes care of her disabled sister, she came from a normal family, everything's all hunky-dory. And then you find out, no, she's just as messed up as these other people, and no one even knows. And I just think that's really, really cool to see that, kind of. Because the serial killer who's in prison is a very stereotypical, like, someone you would, like, if you, say, picture a serial killer in your mind. But the main character is, like, just as fucked up as the serial killer that she's talking to. And it was just really interesting to find out all about how actually horrific the main character is. And this is kind of a spoiler, I guess, but I don't even think it matters because it's just done and it's so well done, like the plot and the story, that you should read it. If you haven't read it, even if horror's not your thing, it's really good and I highly recommend. 9 out of 10. So now that we're getting past the horror, it's time for The Sun and the Star by Riordan. My king. I love that man and all of his writing. I am a huge Percy Jackson fan. I have been since I was young. And I was so excited when he announced this book. I was so excited because I love Percy Jackson. And after oh my god, what is the sequel series? Heroes of Olympus? No, that's the first one, right? The ones with Leo and Hazel and all of them. He said he wasn't gonna make any more content about like those characters. But he lied because he made this about Nico and Will, and I loved it. I love this book. I love this book. I love this book. Nico was one of my favorite characters from the series, which, you know, is not weird to say because I feel like everyone says that Nico is their favorite character from the series. Well, one of mine. He's one of my top 3 for sure. But it was just so nice to see him kind of get his own thing. Actually, it wasn't nice because Riordan sent him to Tartarus again. And my poor boy needs to stop getting so much trauma. He's so traumatized. He already went to Tartarus once alone, and then he sent him there. Stop giving Nico trauma. If Nico comes up in any future works by you, and you send him on anything close to a Tartarus trip or something else that's trauma-inducing, when I catch you, Ricky. Ricky, when I catch you, Ricky. I'm just kidding, I love Riordan and I love this book, and despite the fact that Nico got way more traumatized than he has any right to be in this book, it was really good. It was so good. Him and Will's relationship is adorable, and I loved playing into the fact that Will is sunlight. Like, it's a very tropey romance, black cat, golden retriever type deal, but it really lent into kind of those moments where the opposite pieces in them clash, and they clash hard, and it makes it hard to work. But that's one thing I love in like any type of romance book. Not that I would classify this necessarily as a romance book, but obviously romance is a big part of it because Nico and Will are dating. I love to see when the couple has certain things that really clash, and they make such a big effort to make it work because they love the other person and they learn how to live together despite the clashing, because that's so realistic. I hate couples where it feels like they just mesh so well together, because though that can happen, that's not super realistic. Like, humans are so complex that you're gonna have some sort of trait or hobby or something that the other person isn't going to like, or is going to clash with something, and part of like loving someone is just figuring out ways to make that work. And I just feel like it's just presented so well in this book. I really loved it. I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. Minus 1 point because they traumatized Nico so freaking much and he doesn't deserve that. And then minus another point because there's a lot of references to pop culture in this book, which is very much a Riordan thing. And I don't know if it's just because I'm so much older now, whereas I was younger when I read the Percy Jackson books, so it didn't bother me as much back then. But it was just kind of awkward. And I don't usually like when there's a lot of pop culture references of the time in a book, because it can date it if you read it later, and it also just kind of brings me out of the story a little bit. Because they talk about Call Me By Your Name by Lil Nas X in this, which was funny to read. I have to admit, it did get a little chuckle out of me, but it was also kind of brought me out of the story a little bit, because then I was like thinking about real life stuff instead of being fully invested in this book. So that's why it loses a point, but I love this book. If you're a Percy Jackson fan and you haven't read this book, please read it. And also, here's my edge painting, because this was, that's a hobby of mine now, so I'm gonna show off my paintings when I can. Now is the point that I kind of don't remember what I read next. That was one of the last books I read. Oh, I remember what I read next. I don't own a copy of it because I hated it, so I gave it away before I moved home. And I guess I'll put a picture here. It is The Wilder Girls by someone. I don't remember the author's name. I hated this book. I'm not gonna lie, I really hated it. Which makes me so sad because I had heard so many good things about this book. It's a very popular book. It has very high ratings. People love this book. I DNF'd it. And then I went back and tried it again, and I DNF'd it again. And then I finally committed on the 3rd try to reading the whole book. And I hated it. I see so many reviews just raving about this book, and I could not get into it. I thought it started off really slow, which isn't necessarily a deal breaker to me. I don't mind kind of a slow beginning as long as it picks up and gets really good, which this book did not. Also, the writing style, in my opinion, was horrendous. I was being like thrown out of the book from the writing style. The sentences were so choppy and weird, and not even like in a place where it would fit, where there was like tension or like a fight or something where like you want it to chop up to like hit those actions, but in just like really random spots everywhere. It wasn't like saved for specific moments to really have an impact. It was all the time. I would read a page and I would get to the end of the page and I'd be like, what the heck did I just read? And I would have to read it over like 2 times because the prose was just weird, and I would read something that would make no sense. The sentence structure of things was weird. The way dialogue was inserted into the text was also confusing. It still just felt like the dialogue and the text were like intermingling in a weird way. I don't know. I didn't like it. I thought the story was not good. And I get the point of what the story was trying to achieve, I feel like. I just think that we can achieve that with a story that's also like good and fun and interesting to read and doesn't make me want to rip my hair out because of the choppy sentences and the weird sentence structure and the weird dialogue. I don't know. I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I didn't like the ending either. It was just probably a 3 out of 10. The next book is the first book that I read when I got back to the States. I was very excited about it because we're going back to the Asian fantasy with 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. That's her name. And I love this cover. This is apparently the UK cover. I bought this book while I was in Korea. Didn't realize this was the UK cover, and you cannot find this cover like anywhere in the US, at least where I live. Like even on Amazon and stuff. So I did get the sequel to this book, but it's in the US version, so my versions don't match, which I hate. But love this. I also painted the edges, if anyone cares to see. I was actually pretty proud of this one. So I love this book. I love this book so much. It's just, again, so freaking good. I don't know if I'm just biased towards like Asian fantasy because I've read so much fantasy that like US based or like European based fantasy, and Asian fantasy obviously is something very different. There's a lot of different tropes and a lot of different things involved, and so it just feels so like fresh and new when I'm reading. But I haven't read like anything yet that I didn't like. 6 Crimson Cranes I just loved. Again, I just love the main character. Something about these main characters are always, they're strong and resilient and determined, but still kind and still have like a big heart that cares for people. And I love that. I'm a sucker for that. I'm a sucker for strong, gentle female characters. I am. It's like my favorite character. The like perfect blend of like strong, determined, badass, but gentle and kind and loving and caring. That's just, that's my, we're like this. We're like this. And this character, are you okay? She's fine. I think the plot of this book was really good, and I thought that the premise of having a main character who can't talk was really interesting because it cut off a lot of chances for like long bits of dialogue between the main character, and you really are just, you just get to sit with her thoughts a lot. She does find a way to communicate with people a little bit, but mostly it's just you're with her thoughts and how she acts with people. She doesn't get to talk, she doesn't get to like lie, she doesn't get to tell the truth, she doesn't get to manipulate, she doesn't get to be honest with people because she can't talk. So all of her emoting and stuff comes through her actions with people, and her, I think that's really interesting, really unique. And I also just love her little paper bird, Kiki. I think Kiki is a great little comic relief side character. I just love her being a little paper bird. I think it's really cute. The romance in this book, I freaking loved it. Okay, her and her love, what's his name? Dathan, I think. Shiori and Dathan. I want a love like that, okay? I want Dathan and Shiori's love because it was wholesome, it was adorable, I loved it. It was just so sweet and it was just everything that I wanted out of it. Because I'm not usually a romance person, but when the romance is romancing, and this one hit, I was like screaming, crying, throwing up, kicking my feet, giggling like a schoolgirl. It was bad. It was embarrassing. I read this book in a single day because I could not get enough of it. It was so good. I loved her brothers. I do wish we saw a little bit more of her brothers. Like her and her brothers interacting together. Because I loved her brothers and I loved the glimpses of their relationship you saw, but I felt like you didn't get, well, I didn't get enough for my sake. I would love more. That's my only critique, is that I just want more. And it was amazing. 10 out of 10. I freaking love this book. I love it so much. Okay, the next book is the sequel, The Dragon's Promise. Like I said, it is the US cover, so it does look different from the first book, which really sucks because not only are they vastly different covers, but they're different sizes too. This one's smaller. So it's my hope I'm gonna get the Six Crimson Cranes US cover, and hopefully I'll be able to find the Dragon's Promise UK cover too, and then I'll just have two sets that match. But for now I have this. I was really nervous when I started this book because I was really scared that this was going to be another Daughter of the Moon Goddess, Heart of the Sun Warrior situation where I loved the first book and then the second book just like did not do it for me. And especially because in the first book you have like the dragon character. I can't remember his name. I'm like really bad at remembering characters' names. Oh, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Siryu, I think? I really like his character. And in the start of the second book, like in the first book you can kind of tell he like likes her. Like I thought in the first book when we first meet him and they're like interacting, I was like, okay, he's gonna be the love interest. But then he wasn't, and he pops up, but not in like a like love triangle type of way in the first book. Once she meets Dathan, it's pretty much her and Dathan for the rest of the book, which I love. And then the start of this book is Shiori going with Siryu. Without Dathan, without anyone else, it's just them two going to the Dragon Realm. And it's very obvious that Siryu likes her. And I was really worried that this was going to spawn into that love triangle trope of a second book, like Heart of the Sun Warrior, and I was like, oh, I really don't want to read about that again, because her and Dathan are just so adorable. They're so sweet, they're so precious. Luckily it didn't. They had kind of their moment, but I thought that this was the best way. If you have a side character who you want to be kind of like a love interest also with the main character, this was a great way to do it. They had a few chapters where they had their time together, and Shiori had the moment of like, maybe in a different context, in a different time, in a different life, we would end up together, but not for this one. I have Dathan and I have to stay with him. Like, I'm gonna stay with him, I'm gonna stay true to him. And I was like, yes girl, yes, you have Dathan, stay with him. It made me so happy. But I do like Siryu, and again, like Shiori said, if this was a different book, maybe I would like to see them together. However, not with my baby boy Dathan there. I'm sorry. Sorry Siryu, you gotta go. Dathan has to shine. And he did. They ended up together. It was great. I loved it. The ending, I've seen a lot of people had mixed reactions about the ending of this book. I liked it. Would I have preferred, obviously, a much happier ending? Yes. But I thought that it was a good ending. It's still sort of happy. I'd say it's more like bittersweet. But I think, given the context of everything that happens in these two books, Shiori's actions had consequences, and I think that's good. I love when the main character has to deal with consequences for their actions in books. And even though I wish that she would have gotten a much happier ending than she got, I thought it fit the plot, and I thought that it was a really good ending, and I loved it. I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10 solely because I wish the ending was happier. But I think the ending is perfect for the book. So I don't want it to be different, but just like the little, like my heart is like, no, give them more, they deserve happiness. So for my heart's sake, I have to take off a point. But other than that, this book was amazing. It was a perfect sequel. This was such a good duology. Highly recommend. So the next book I actually didn't read next, but it goes with those two books, so I'm going to talk about it now, and that is Her Radiant Curse by Elizabeth Lim. So this is the prequel, kind of, to that duology. And it's a book that's totally about the stepmother, which I think is really cool because the stepmother is really not that, well, not that she's not a big character, she is a big character, but she's not in the first book very much. You just hear the stories of her, you hear the memories from Shiori of her, but she's not physically there except in the very first few chapters and the very last couple chapters. So I think it's really interesting that we got a whole book about her, and I'm really happy because she's a very, very complex and interesting character, and I really enjoyed her. And I was really worried about how is Elizabeth Lim going to write such a thick prequel about this character when we already know everything about her, because in the duology you find out about her past. Like, you know about her sister, you know that about the curse she had, and like all this stuff. So I was like, we already know how this is going to end. We already know the ending of this book. So it's so thick. Am I actually going to get into it knowing the ending? The answer is yes. I don't know how she did it, but not only did I read the book excited to get to the ending, but I read the book like rooting for the characters that I knew were going to die, because I know how the story ends, because you're told it in the first book. You're told it in Six Crimson Crane how this story ends, and it did not matter to me. In my brain, I was like rooting for the characters. I cried on 2 occasions in this book because it's just beautifully written. It's a beautiful story. It's really sad in a lot of parts, and it didn't even matter that I knew how it ended. I was so invested in the characters, I was so invested in the story, and I was rooting for a good ending despite the fact that I knew how it ended. And I don't know how she managed to get that out of me, but she did. So this is like a 10 out of 10 for sure, because it was amazing. The sister in this book, they're like sisterhood. Just, as someone who has 2 sisters myself, I just really felt for it. And I could feel that like love, but also kind of that hate you get sometimes when you have a sister who's maybe put on a pedestal and stuff, and you can like, you get this like hatred towards them, but also you still love them, you would do anything for them, and that's portrayed like really well in this book. And I just loved it. I loved it. It was beautiful. It was a great prequel to the first 2 books. It's so good. It's so good. 10 out of 10. Okay, my next book, delving back into horror. You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kalynn Bayron. I'm not gonna lie, I hated this book. I hated this book. And this is again another book that I was super excited for, because I've heard so many good things about this book. And this is the author who wrote Cinderella is Dead, which I haven't read, but I've heard really good things about that book too. So I was really excited for it. I also painted the edges because I saw the Waterstones version of this had edges like this, and so I wanted to make my own. I didn't like it. I really didn't like it. The plot was really weird and confusing, and there was so many things that just weren't really, like, the plot was very, very, very surface level. I feel like it did not delve into anything really. The characters were also very surface level. I didn't feel like I knew any of them. I didn't feel like I cared about any of them. This is also another case of books using a lot of like slang or like references to pop culture. That's just a me thing. I personally don't like that very much. I think in terms of doing that, it was well done in this book. I just personally don't like that, and it did it a lot. I just didn't like this. I didn't like the characters. I didn't care about. The only one I cared about ended up kind of being bad in the end, so that was fun. The characters were really freaking dumb, like really dumb, the entire book. And I know this is supposed to be like a kitschy camp slasher book. It was also slow. It didn't get into things until at least halfway through the book, and this is not a very long book. So like, and then when it did get into stuff, it ended really fast without really delving into any of, like, the characters in the first half of the book, first maybe fourth of the book, are very much shown to be these like horror-loving characters. At least some of them. The main character and one of her best friends. They're like, they watch all these horror movies. They know a lot of like the lore behind horror movies. Her one friend is like the whole time, anytime someone does something, she's like, you can't go do that. That's how people die in a horror movie. You're gonna get us killed. Like that, those kind of people who are like, you can't do that. This is how we die in a horror movie. And then those same people are the ones doing the most idiotic shit. Like saying, hey, I know it's about to be dark and we're in the middle of nowhere with no cell service, but let's go take flashlights, walk a mile in the woods to go find the creepy old lady who shot a shotgun at us earlier to ask her questions. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? As someone who has apparently watched a bunch of movies and knows all the horror movie rules of you don't do this, that's like so many rules broken right there. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? And there's just a lot of decisions like that. The antagonist was weird. There was this whole magic lake situation, but it's just like never explained. And there's a cult that's also not really explained very much. Like everything is very surface level. Nothing goes deeper than just basically being told, hey, there's a cult. We're not gonna tell you really anything about the cult, but there's a cult. Hey, there's this magic lake. I'm not gonna tell you about this magic lake. I'm not gonna tell you why it's here, how it has its powers, nothing like that. You can know, there's just magic lake. That's what everything felt like in this book. It felt like you were just told, and no explanation, just, yeah. And the ending was really bad. And it turned sci-fi at the end. And I feel like it was supposed to be this big twist, but I saw it coming. And I was like, please don't do that. That's gonna be really goofy if you do that. And then it did it, and I was like, oh, that was really goofy and dumb. I hated it. It was just bad. Also to Kalynn, Bayron, I'm so sorry that I just ripped apart your book like that. The premise was good. The writing was good. It just needed more. It just needed more explanation. This could have been a lot thicker, and then I think I would have liked it, maybe. But this was a 2 out of 10 for me. Get out of here. I did not like that book. Next, we have Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Chalice of the Gods, by, of course, Riordan. So remember earlier when I read The Star and the Sun? The Sun and the Star? The Star and the Sun? The Sun and the Star. I said how I was really excited because Rick had said that he wasn't going to do any more content with the Percy Jackson characters. You thought you weren't, Rick. You thought you weren't, but you did. So we have the now official 6th book in the first series, the original series, and I loved it. I mean, there's not really much to say. I'm a Percy Jackson fan. This is more Percy Jackson content. I loved it. For it just being like a fun little 6th book to a series that had ended a long time ago and we didn't think we would get anything more for. It was good. It was a fun read. It was a quick read. I loved being back with the characters, and it was great. I'd give it a 7 out of 10 because actually no, an 8 out of 10. This is an 8 out of 10. I loved it. I loved reading about it. The only reason it gets 2 points off is because, again, it's middle grade and I'm starting to get a little too old, I feel like, to really like get into it. But yeah, it was great. I love the story. I do think some of the stuff was just a little too fast. I think it needed to be a little bit longer, but it's great. If you like Percy Jackson, go read this book. It's good. Next book we have is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. This is kind of like dark fantasy. This is like fantasy horror mixed together, and it's great. I love that. I'm gonna go ahead and give my ranking first, or my rating. This is a 6 out of 10 for me. And I know I just said I loved it, and I did. It's great. I think the idea is really cool, and I'm a sucker for fantasy and horror, obviously, from my book choices, are my two favorite things. I love them, and I love when they get mixed together. I'm a big D&D person. I play Dungeons and Dragons, so like anything that's fantasy and also like stressful and scary, that's my that's my thing. I love that, and this book does it really well. My only gripes with it is that the main character is insufferable, in my opinion. There's a reason why she's really like aggressive and irritating, which is fine, but also you don't find out about that until like pretty much the end. So the whole beginning, even though retroactively I'm like, okay, I can understand why she was like that, you still have to sit through reading her like that without an explanation. And she was just frustrating a lot of the times, and how she interacted with people and stuff. And I do like her character. Like, I don't dislike her character. I just think she was a hard character to have as the main character, because I really didn't want to keep reading sometimes in certain situations that she was just being. And also, I think I love the romance, the very brief romance that happened in this book. Again, I'm not really a big romance person, so I'm not usually the one to complain about a lack of romance, but I will, because we got this like little romance. Well, this is more of a complaint retroactively for the second book, so I guess I'll talk about that later. We got introduced to a cute little romance that only lasted for a few chapters, and then, spoiler alert, they killed off the guy. And then the whole rest of the book was just her. And then he came back right at the end to save her. So, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. But I loved it. I thought the story was really good, other than just like my minor gripes with the main character being annoying. And then her and Ellery, like the romance thing. I like the romance. It felt weird. It was so fast, and then he was gone. And then he came back right at the end to save her. But then they separated again. He saved her, and then she went back home, and he stayed in the other world. So it just, I don't know. That was my one big gripe. So that's why it's a 6 out of 10. Everything else, like the writing style, everything, I really enjoyed. Mostly. But yeah, 6 out of 10. So obviously, next book is The Night Country, the second book. I got the first book in paperback and the second book in hardcover, which I hate. I like them to be the same. But I found this book at an Ollie's for like $2 in like perfect condition, so I couldn't pass that up. I liked this book a lot. I think I like this one more than I liked the first one, which is wild, because usually I don't. I feel like most people always like the first book more than a sequel. I just thought the story was more interesting here, because you get to meet a lot of the people from the hinterland, and it was really interesting, and it was a lot more of kind of a mystery. Like the first one was sort of a mystery, but this one just felt more mysterious, I guess. I couldn't tell where this one was going as much as I felt like I could tell where the first one was going. The only thing that I have a gripe with in this one too is Ellery Finch, the romance, because at the very end he comes back, like the very end, he comes back and they get together, and then it ends, so you don't get any scenes with them, and it just felt weird. Like, it felt weird that their romance was such a big part of this book, even though I don't know. That's like with both books. I don't understand the romance between those two. It feels weird. It feels like there's context missing from it. It feels like there just needs to be something more with them to make it make sense. I don't know. And also the main character is insufferable in this book again. She really is. And it makes less sense in this book. Yeah, I know, Buzz. Insufferable, right? I couldn't get behind the main character. Some of the choices she makes in this book, I'm like, what are you doing? I don't know. But despite that, again, I mean, I read this book really fast. I chugged through it. It was great. I really enjoyed it. And I highly recommend it. I think if you can just look past the character, which I definitely can because the book is good enough, the story is good enough, and she is an interesting character despite being really annoying to read through sometimes. Highly recommend. I think it's worth the read for sure. The second book I'm gonna give 7 out of 10. 7.5 out of 10. The next book is also kind of that like fantasy horror. Oh, he's making me feel so bad. I can't let him in here because he gets under my bed and wreaks absolute havoc because he's a menace to society. But a cute menace to society. So the next book is House of Hollow, which, like I said, that perfect blend of like fantasy, horror, and mystery. Like, she's got a lot in her, okay? First of all, love this freaking cover. I haven't been talking about the covers of the books, really. There's a lot that I like, but this one, I just love it. I think she's gorgeous, and I haven't painted the edges yet, but I cannot wait to. Buzz! This was amazing. It was so dark and so whimsical in such a like creepy and disconcerting way. I loved every second of it. This was a good mystery. It really had me just like reeling, and I did predict kind of what had happened, but it didn't even matter because the way that it goes about like telling you in the story, it didn't even matter that I already figured out because I felt like I hadn't, the way that this portrays it. It was so good. The characters are so interesting and so rich, and they have so much depth to them. Even one of the characters who feels kind of like a caricature at first, which is kind of the point of him, he just gets so much more depth to him as the book goes on, the more you learn about him, which is cool. I love that because I feel like that's how, when you meet people in real life, you like meet the caricature of them that they portray to you, and the more you get to know them, the more you get to see like the layers and stuff. But this was really interesting. I think we need more of these, and if anyone has any recommendations of like books like this, or like the Hazelwood, or anything where it's very creepy fantasy, I would love it. Just leave a comment below about your recommendations because I need more. I need more because this was so good. This gets a 10 out of 10. Actually, just kidding. This gets a 9 out of 10 because of the ending is a huge kind of cliffhanger. And I researched if there was going to be a sequel, and the author said maybe. She said she might make a sequel, she might not. So she left the ending open-ended so she could. Krystal Sutherland, this is a personal message to you. If you don't write a sequel to this book, I am going to lose my mind. I'm going to come find you and, I don't know, cry in a corner. I'm gonna cry and make you watch me cry because I need a sequel to this book with the ending that you gave. Okay? You committed to an open ending. Now you have to write a sequel. I don't make the rules. That's the rules of writing books, okay? Please write a sequel. I'm begging you. I really need it. I love this book. 10 out of 10. Finally made it to the last book. I have talked way too much. I'm going to try and edit this down as much as possible. I'm a ranter. I've got ADHD, so when I start talking about, you know, the things that I enjoy or don't enjoy, I kind of go off the handle. But last but certainly not least, we have A Study in Drowning. I don't even know what to say about this book. I love this book. And I know I've said that a lot with all the books today. I have a lot of love to give, okay? I've got a big heart. I got a lot of love. for books. But this, like, I feel like I'm going to be annoying and make this book my personality. I just read this last week, so it's a very fresh read for me. It was so good. And the funny thing is, I was really excited for this book because I bought the normal version of it, and then I found someone selling this Illumicrate exclusive version, which, let me just... Is this not the prettiest book you've ever seen in your life? So I had to have it, and I hadn't read the book yet, but I spent way too much money buying this version because it's just so pretty. So I really wanted to like it because I bought 2 versions of it, and one of them was Illumicrate, so it was really expensive. And I was not enjoying myself the first couple chapters, and I was really worried that I was not going to like this book because the first couple chapters, I couldn't get into the writing style. I didn't really like the main character. I was confused about where the plot was going. And then it started picking up and getting into the story, and I was sold. Like, it was a beautiful story that I think touches on a lot of themes that is really important about kind of what it is to be a woman in a world that's very male dominated. And I know that can sound really like cliche and stuff, but this portrayed it in a really well way. And I love the main character. I started off not liking her, and I don't know where, in what chapter, the freaking flip switched, but it did. And I went from really not liking her to being obsessed with her and realizing that I feel like I relate to her in so many ways. And I think she's the perfect example of like a female character who is really, oh god, I don't even know how to explain my thoughts on this one. I think the main character has a lot of moments where she's kind of cowardly, I guess is the best way to say it. She gets scared at a lot of points, and it affects her decisions, and she can be kind of whiny and argumentative. And I'm not saying this really in a bad way, but just she can, and I love that about her. I feel like it's really hard to write a main character like that that's enjoyable. She does a really good job, because I didn't like her in the first few chapters because of that, but I felt like as I went along, I realized that that's such a normal thing there's a lot of girls out there like this main character, and I feel like they do get hated on because they're not as like tough, and they're not so confident and sure of themselves, and they are a little cowardly, and they do kind of freak out over things, and that's fine. Like, we portray that in such a negative light nowadays, but she was a great character despite those things. She never gave up on what she wanted. She worked hard for it, and she had reasons to be so cowardly. She had a lot of trauma that she was trying to work through, trauma that, again, I also related to. So I could feel myself in her, because the reason she was so fearful in a lot of moments was because of previous trauma, and like, I totally get that, and I could feel what she felt. And once I realized, like, I don't know, once you start getting more of her thoughts and stuff, I just really loved her. And I think she's just portrayed so well, and I thought the story was portrayed so well. And the romance in this book, Preston, I think this book might have turned me into a romance girly, I'm not gonna lie, because I just need a whole book with just a romance like this. I loved them. I loved them so much. I loved their romance. They started off as enemies to lovers, but it wasn't even like enemies, it was just annoyance at each other to lovers, and it was just so good, and it was so beautiful. And there was a smut scene in this, and I didn't even care. Like, I enjoyed reading it, and I hate smut, and this book made me be not only perfectly okay with it, but enjoy it. So Ava Reid, I don't know what you're doing to me, but it was beautiful. I loved it. I loved the ending. I loved her getting her confidence at the end and being sure of herself and finally sticking up and fighting for herself after spending so long kind of running away from the things that scared her and reminded her of her trauma, and she finally overcame it and was willing to fight for herself and not let that happen to other people, what happened to her. And it was just great. It was great. I loved it. I loved the characters. I loved the romance. The plot was a little weird and hard to follow in some parts. I don't even care though. Any gripes I have with this is so outweighed by how much I love it. So it's getting a 10 out of 10. I don't even care. I'm not even going to talk about the things that I thought weren't super good about this book, because everything else always it, and I love this book. So 10 out of 10. I loved it. I need to read more of Ava Reid's books now because I really enjoyed myself. Yeah, those were all the books I read this year. I can't wait to read more. I'm hoping to maybe read 1 or 2 books more before the end of 2023. But you know, with Christmas and everything, it's gonna be really busy, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, you know, when I started recording this, I didn't think about the fact that I'd have to do an outro at the end. I don't really know what to say. So I'm just gonna say, if you made it to the end, thank you for watching. Hopefully when I edit it, it's not gonna be but so long. I know I talked a lot, but I'll try and make it as short as possible. But yeah, thanks for watching. And if you want, subscribe. I'm gonna start posting stuff about books. I might post some video game stuff too if you guys like video games. Or if, you know, you have any suggestions of stuff I should do, let me know. Thank you for watching, and keep reading, guys.